The phone buzzed once on the countertop, lighting up the room in that dim amber glow from the setting sun. I didn't mean to look, but when I saw his name, David Turner, I froze. My husband had been dead for 5 years, yet there it was, his name pulsing on my daughter-in-law's phone like a heartbeat that shouldn't exist. If you've ever trusted someone only to feel the floor vanish beneath you, subscribe and tell me where you're watching from. Stories like this don't just happen in movies. My breath caught, grief mixing with something colder, sharper. I wanted to believe it was a mistake. I needed to. But deep down, I already knew. That was the moment everything started to unravel. It was 2:30 p.m. when I heard the faint buzz of a phone against the kitchen counter. I didn't think much of it until I saw the screen light up. The name froze me where I stood. David Turner, my late husband, the man I buried 5 years ago. For a second, my body didn't feel like my own. The world went quiet, except for that small vibration that somehow felt deafening. The phone wasn't mine. It was Laura's, my daughter-in-law's. She'd left it on the counter while running upstairs. I shouldn't have looked, but the message sat there like a ghost staring back at me. Miss you. Need to talk. My breath caught. My mind tried to make sense of what my eyes saw. Was this a cruel joke, some glitch, or had I gone mad from missing him all these years? Grief poured back in like a tide I thought had long gone out. Memories of David's laugh, his scent after mowing the lawn, the way he'd hold my hand on long drives, all came crashing in, tangled with disbelief. Then confusion turned into something sharper. Why would my daughter-in-law's phone show his name? Why her, and why now? After all this time, a chill spread through me. I knew I couldn't ignore it. Whatever this was, it wasn't random. I needed to know the truth, even if it meant reopening wounds I'd buried with him. That's when I decided to start digging. I used to think my life had finally found a quiet rhythm again. Mornings were calm, the smell of coffee, the hum of the refrigerator, the sun spilling across the kitchen table where David and I once sat together. It had taken years for me to reach that kind of peace after losing him. When he passed, it felt like someone had hollowed out my chest and left the shell behind. But with time, grief softened into something bearable, something I could live beside. David had been my anchor. We met young, built a simple life in North Carolina, and spent nearly 40 years together. When cancer took him, I didn't know how to move through days without him. But Ryan, our son, became my lifeline. He'd check on me every week, always telling me I was stronger than I believed. And Laura, his wife, was like the daughter I never had. Warm, attentive, always knowing how to make me laugh when the world felt too quiet. She helped me through holidays, kept me company at dinner, even sat with me on those long evenings when I still half expected David's car to pull into the driveway. So when I say I trusted her, I mean completely. Before that afternoon, I thought life had settled. I'd found comfort in routine, in memories, in family. The wound was still there, but it no longer bled. But the moment I saw that message, David's name, glowing on her phone, everything I believed in cracked. The warmth I'd felt for her turned cold in an instant. Something was wrong, deeply wrong. I didn't want to think it, but I couldn't help it. Someone I loved had betrayed me, and I wasn't going to let it rest until I found out how. I stood there, frozen, staring at the screen like it might vanish if I blinked. My hand hovered over the phone. Every fiber in me screamed to put it down, to walk away, to pretend I hadn't seen David's name appear. It felt wrong, violating someone's privacy, especially Laura's. But something deeper pulled at me, a whisper I couldn't silence, the need to know. When I finally opened the messages, my chest tightened. The words looked exactly like his. The phrasing, the small quirks, how he'd write short sentences when he was angry, the affectionate way he used my name. Except this wasn't me he was talking to. These were messages filled with affection, with memories only we should have shared. My stomach turned. The world tilted. For a second, I thought I might be losing my mind. David was gone, buried, mourned, and laid to rest. Yet here he was, texting the woman I'd welcomed into our family. I remembered the day Laura offered to organize David's old things. She'd been kind, thoughtful, saying it might help me heal. She'd even taken his old phone, promising to save photos for Ryan. I hadn't thought twice. Now that moment replayed in my mind with a sharp edge. Then came other fragments. The time she wore his watch just to remember him. The night she mentioned little details about his past that I'd never told her. Each memory twisted deeper into my gut until it became impossible to ignore. Could she have somehow used his phone? Was this sick curiosity? Or had there been something between them all along? Something I'd been too blind to see. My heart raced. I wanted to believe there was some rational explanation, but the ache in my chest told me otherwise. Every line I read felt like a betrayal layered over another loss. By the time I set the phone down, my hands were trembling. The guilt of invading her privacy still burned, but the pain of not knowing burned hotter. I looked around the quiet kitchen, at the framed photo of David smiling by the lake, and felt anger rise through the sorrow. Whatever this was, lie, manipulation, or truth, I wasn't going to let his memory be twisted by anyone. I needed answers, and I would find them, no matter what it cost me. The next morning, I woke up with a weight in my chest that wouldn't lift. I had spent the night replaying everything, the messages, the memories, the details I'd ignored. By sunrise, one thing was clear: pretending not to see wouldn't bring me peace. I had to know. Whatever the truth was, it was already inside my home, wearing a smile I thought I could trust. I moved quietly through the kitchen, every action deliberate, pouring coffee, slipping on my coat, grabbing my keys. The air outside smelled like rain. The sky was low and gray, the kind of morning where time feels slower, heavier. I waited in my car until I saw Laura pull out of the driveway, her red sedan easing onto the wet street. I followed at a distance, far enough not to draw attention, close enough to keep her in sight. My heart pounded steady and sharp. The windshield wipers kept a slow rhythm against the drizzle. She wasn't heading to work like she said. Instead, she drove toward the edge of town, past the shops, the school, the gas station David and I used to stop at after church. When she turned into the parking lot of the Riverside Inn, my stomach dropped. I parked a few spaces away, barely breathing. A few minutes later, I saw him, Mark Dawson, Ryan's boss. I recognized him from photos at company events. Always beside my son, always smiling too wide. He walked toward Laura's car, looked around once, and then she stepped out. They greeted each other with the kind of familiarity that told me everything I didn't want to know. For a moment, my vision blurred. The sound of rain faded. All I could feel was the pulse in my temples and the hollowness spreading through me. I wanted to scream, to confront her right there, but I didn't. Instead, I stayed still, gripping the steering wheel until my knuckles ached. Betrayal is a strange kind of pain. It doesn't explode, it sinks, quiet and deep, until you feel it in your bones. I realized then this wasn't just about infidelity. There was something larger at play. I didn't know what yet, but I would. So I started the car, drove home, and promised myself I wouldn't speak a word until I had proof. I didn't tell Ryan. I couldn't. Every time I looked at him, I saw David's eyes and Laura's smile, and the truth sat heavy in my throat. But I needed help, someone outside the storm. That's when I went to see Ellen, my next-door neighbor. She'd been a paralegal before retiring, sharp as ever, the kind of woman who saw details most people missed. When I told her what I'd found, without naming names, she didn't flinch. She just nodded slowly, poured coffee, and said we should start by looking at what I could prove. It was comforting. Her calmness, like standing beside a lighthouse when the fog feels too thick. Together, we began sorting through David's old paperwork. Bank statements, insurance letters, pension records, all tucked neatly in boxes I hadn't touched since the funeral. The smell of paper and dust carried years with it. I felt him there, in the margins of every form. Ellen laid out the documents in order. That's when I saw its small withdrawals I didn't recognize. Not large enough to raise alarms. 200 here, 300 there. But they stretched back years. Ellen traced her finger across the dates and frowned. The pattern was clean, deliberate, and every transaction had one thing in common. They began shortly after Laura had helped me digitize David's files. My heart started to race. The total came to around $15,000. It wasn't the money that broke me. It was the realization that she had used his name, his accounts, his memory to take from me, to take from him. I remembered the day she'd offered to handle David's passwords, saying it would make things easier for me. The tenderness in her voice had felt genuine then. Now it felt like poison. For a long while, I just sat there staring at the papers, the numbers blurred, but the betrayal was crystal clear. It wasn't enough for her to take my trust. She had stolen part of my husband's legacy, piece by piece, hidden behind compassion and smiles. Ellen reached over and touched my hand, grounding me back in the room. Her voice was steady when she said we could prove everything if I wanted to. And I did. The grief that had weighed me down for years shifted into something new, something cold and fierce. I wasn't a grieving widow anymore. I was a woman who finally saw the truth. Laura had mistaken my silence for weakness. That was her first mistake. I intended to make it her last. The table looked the same as it always had. Roast chicken, candles, soft music, but nothing about it felt familiar anymore. I sat across from Laura, the woman who had smiled through my grief, poured wine at every holiday, and called me Mom with practiced warmth. Tonight, that word tasted bitter. Ryan talked, as he always did. cheerful and unaware, his voice filling the quiet that Laura and I carefully avoided. The clink of silverware sounded too sharp, every small sound amplified. I studied her face, how she laughed at the right moments, asked about my garden, poured more gravy onto Ryan's plate. Her hands were steady, but her eyes weren't. She couldn't look at me for more than a second before glancing away. I noticed the smallest details, the way her smile faded between sentences, the tremor when she reached for her glass, the stiffness in her shoulders when I mentioned how I'd been organizing David's old papers again. That was my test. Subtle, but deliberate. I watched her pause, her fork frozen just above the plate before she forced a laugh that didn't reach her eyes. The air grew thicker. Ryan kept talking about work, about Mark Dawson, about the new project at the firm. Each mention of that name tightened the knot in my chest. I listened, nodding, all while keeping my face calm. Beneath the surface, my thoughts moved cold and steady. I had the proof. I had the pattern. But it wasn't time yet. For a brief moment, I caught Laura looking at me, really looking. Her expression flickered between guilt and defiance, a silent acknowledgement of what hung between us. It was like standing on opposite sides of a mirror, each of us pretending not to see the cracks. I felt the words rise in my throat, sharp and ready to cut through the false peace. But I swallowed them. Not tonight. Rage would make her careful. Silence would make her careless. As I cleared my plate, I felt something shift inside me. The grief that once made me fragile now gave me clarity. I'd learned that silence could be louder than rage, and patience sharper than any accusation. When dinner ended, I kissed Ryan on the cheek and thanked them both, my voice steady. Laura's smile was tight, her pulse visible at her neck. Outside, the night air felt cold and clean. I walked to my car without looking back, certain of one thing: this was far from over. I thought I'd already uncovered the worst of it. But grief teaches you one thing. There's always another layer beneath what you think you understand. A week after that dinner, I went to see Alan Mercer, David's old business partner. He still kept an office above the hardware store, cluttered with ledgers and framed photographs of better years. I told him I needed help finding a few missing documents from David's files, papers Laura once said she'd organized. Alan pulled out old tax folders and stopped, frowning. Several records were missing: returns, account ledgers, even correspondence that should have been filed together. When he checked the access logs from the digital archive, one name appeared again and again: Laura Dawson Turner, dates stretching back nearly 5 years. The realization hit like a slow chill crawling up my spine. She hadn't stumbled into deceit. She'd built it, piece by piece, using the access I had trusted her with. I told Ellen everything that afternoon. She called her nephew Daniel, a cybersecurity consultant. Within 2 days, he sent back a report that left me shaking. Laura Turner wasn't who she claimed to be. Her real name was Melissa Carter. 2 previous identities, 2 marriages, both ending in financial disputes and quiet settlements. Each husband had died or disappeared under suspicious circumstances. Each case ended before reaching court. This wasn't about infidelity. It was a pattern, calculated, professional, and predatory. She had found families like mine, women like me, softened by grief, and used affection as camouflage. I sat there staring at the printouts. every word a blow to what I believed about family, love, and trust. The betrayal was no longer private, it was criminal. I thought of David's name on those forged documents, his memory used as bait in her schemes. My sorrow hardened into something unbreakable. This wasn't about vengeance anymore. It was about justice. I began to gather everything: emails, financial statements, the texts, copies of her aliases. I made a folder and labeled it Truth. By the time I closed it, my hands had stopped trembling. I wasn't afraid of her anymore. I knew exactly what she was, and I knew what had to come next. I would expose her. Publicly. Completely. Laura had hidden behind kindness and family. Now she'd face the one thing she couldn't manipulate: truth spoken out loud. The air in the hotel lobby felt thick with silence, the kind that hums just before a storm. I knew this place too well. The same hallway, the same muted carpet, the same door I had watched them enter weeks ago. But this time, I wasn't hiding. I had no tremor in my hands, no doubt in my mind. When I knocked, the sound was steady, deliberate. Laura opened the door, surprise flickering into fear before she masked it with that practiced smile. Mark stood behind her, his expression shifting between guilt and calculation. For a brief second, I could almost hear my own heartbeat in the quiet room. I told them I knew everything, every withdrawal, every file, every lie. They tried to deny it first. Soft voices, confusion, the act of wounded innocence. Then came the sharper tone, the attempt to gaslight, to make me question what I'd seen. Mark stepped closer, words like smoke meant to cloud the air. But I had already walked through worse storms. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't flinch. I simply told them that the evidence was already out of my hands. The bank, the authorities, the attorney, every document, every signature, every forged name already submitted. I wasn't here to argue. I was here to watch them realize it was over. Laura's face drained of color. The composure she'd worn like armor began to crack. Mark cursed under his breath, his confidence collapsing into panic. I just stood there, quiet and steady, the one thing they couldn't control anymore. I remember thinking how strange it felt. Justice didn't roar. It whispered. It came in the calm after you've stopped doubting your own strength. I turned toward the door, ready to leave them with the silence they'd earned. Laura called my name once, but I didn't look back. I didn't need to. The weight I'd carried for years had lifted the moment I stopped being afraid. As I stepped into the hallway, sunlight from a narrow window caught the edge of the carpet, the same dull red I'd once stared at through tears. Now it looked different, brighter somehow. For the first time since David's death, I felt free. Justice wasn't coming. It had already begun. In the days that followed the confrontation, silence settled over everything. But it wasn't peace. It was the uneasy quiet that comes right before truth takes hold in public. Laura and Mark tried to fight back. They sent emails to friends, claiming I was unstable. That grief had warped my judgment. Mark even tried to contact Ryan's firm, spinning stories about a misunderstanding, a vindictive mother-in-law. It was desperate, transparent. They were drowning, and every lie they reached for only pulled them under faster. The authorities didn't move quickly, but they moved surely. Ellen called me the morning the investigation became official. Financial fraud, identity theft, falsified documents. The charges were clear and damning. When the news reached town, it didn't come as a shock to anyone who had watched Laura's perfect mask slip over the years. People always sense when something isn't real. I didn't watch the hearings. I didn't need to. Justice, I learned, doesn't require an audience. I went back to my garden instead, pulled weeds, cut back dead branches, let the world breathe around me again. When the letter came confirming the accounts had been frozen and restitution proceedings begun, I felt no joy, only relief. I poured tea that morning and sat by the window as sunlight cut through the blinds. For the first time in years, my home felt still, not empty, not haunted, just still. I thought about David, about how trust, once broken, never returns the same, but how love, real love, leaves something that can't be stolen. I realized I hadn't been searching for revenge. I'd been searching for peace, and I'd found it not in their downfall, but in reclaiming my own sense of truth. The world didn't feel brighter that day, only quieter. My hands were steady again. The kettle hummed softly. Outside, the first daffodils had started to bloom, small and sure, unaware of the chaos that had come before them. I understood then that closure isn't something you wait for. It's something you decide. And as I watched the morning light move slowly across the floor, I knew I was finally ready to let go. What came next wasn't vengeance or grief. It was life. The morning air felt lighter that day, as if the world itself had exhaled. I sat on the porch with my tea, the sky just starting to pale into gold. Birds moved through the branches, calm and certain, unaware of everything that had unraveled and healed in this small house. For the first time in years, I wasn't haunted by questions. The ache was still there, but softer, like a scar that had finally stopped throbbing. I thought of what I'd lost, David. Trust. The simple comfort of believing the people closest to me were who they claimed to be. But I also thought of what I'd gained, a truth no one could twist, and a strength I didn't know I had until I was forced to stand alone. I realized how easy it is to doubt ourselves when others betray us. We think if we just loved better, trusted longer, forgiven faster, the ending might have changed. But pain has its purpose. It wakes us up to what we've ignored, and it reminds us that intuition isn't weakness, it's warning. Looking back, I don't hate Laura. Hatred would only tie me to her story longer. I simply wish her the truth she tried so hard to escape. I've learned that justice isn't about revenge. It's about reclaiming your peace and refusing to live in the shadow of someone else's lies. As the wind brushed across the yard, I felt something close to gratitude, not for what happened, but for having survived it with my heart still open. If you've ever been broken by someone you trusted, I hope you know this: the betrayal is not the end. It's a beginning, a painful one, but one that can return you to yourself. Take your time, heal quietly, and when you're ready, share your story. Someone else might need to hear that peace is possible. That's what I've found. Not a perfect ending, but a true one. And maybe that's enough.